Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by LawVu, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, your host, CLO and EVP of Advocacy at LawVu. I have the great pleasure to have with me here today Steve Miles, who's the General Counsel for Asia Pacific and South Africa, as well as the Global Head of Legal Operations for McCain Foods. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Where are you coming from today, Steve?
I'm in Melbourne, Australia, where it's nice and sunny. We're in summer down here, so it's good times.
Fantastic. Summer in Australia. Sounds wonderful. Really appreciate you being on the show today and coming to us from all the way down under. Maybe for the audience, I'd just like to say how we met. I had the real pleasure to meet Steve at the McCain offices in Melbourne. I was down there for an in-view legal leaders retreat, which we were just talking about. Was really, really wonderful at the Jackalope Hotel down in the Mornington Peninsula, and I had the opportunity to meet up with Steve before that retreat, and visit the offices and had a really great chat with Steve, which made me think, and then again at the retreat, and it really made me think this is a guy that I want to give an even larger audience than he already has, because his way of thinking about being an in-house lawyer and managing the legal function is something that's worth giving a broader platform to. So thank you for being here today, Steve.
Very kind. Thanks, David.
For this audience, we have a global audience. Obviously, you're coming from Melbourne. I'm here in San Francisco today. It would be worthwhile just telling everybody why they have definitely used the products of your company.
Yeah, sure. So for those who don't know, McCain produces, I think it's either 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. I should know the official statistic, but it's a high number of French fries in the world. So probably most famously, we are one of the suppliers of Mac fries at McDonald's. So if you've eaten a fry at McDonald's, you've very likely eaten a McCain fry.
Yes.
So we're quite omnipresent in the world, particularly in the Western world.
Yeah.
We also have vegetables and other products, but that would be our most famous SKU.
Yes, well, and I mean a ton of other products, right? In your offices in Melbourne, it was sort of had a good smile on my face from seeing what you had available for the staff in the lobby, which was a bunch of different packaged food items. And I was like, well, that's a really good benefit.
Yeah, exactly. That's a new benefit which we're proud of. But that's right. We exist in I think 160 countries or something like that. So it really is a true global business, and it started as a small family business in rural northern Canada. So it's an amazing story. It's a big part of why I love working in this business.
Yeah. And I think I am really looking forward to diving into that a bit, because I really do love that story. I think it's fascinating. But maybe we start a little bit earlier in your career journey, just to give the audience a sense for where you've come from, because I think you got a great backstory that leads to where you are today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your early years, even before going into legal practice, because I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So I grew up on a farm, actually, a sheep station in southern New South Wales down here in Australia. It was a large sheep station, very isolated. So I had an unconventional childhood. For my primary schooling, I was actually taught at home by my mother. I was one of 5 children. I'm the second youngest, so my younger brother and I were taught at home for 7 years, and then I went to boarding school. So that was a pretty big shift. And then I moved to Melbourne to attend university, which would have been about 25 years ago, a little longer now. And I've been in Melbourne ever since. So yes, I carved a very different path to others in my family. So yeah, look, it was quite pivotal.
Who are still in the agriculture business, I guess?
So my parents have sold the farm as of about 5 years ago. They're out of that. They still live in the country, about 6 hours north of Melbourne. So I do go up there and visit them. And and that's one of the things I like about McCain, actually, is its connection to agriculture, which is a nice synergy to my childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I keep encountering this again and again, right? Like those early sort of experiences how they became valuable much later in life, right? Not that any of us on the show are particularly ancient, but like,
yeah,
you have a connection to agriculture, which clearly is relevant to your role now. I think I always think it's fascinating to see how those connections.
I agree, and I think it's something that comes out as you sort of get later in life. I'm in my mid-40s, and I certainly think about those things more, and what drives me, and what from my early experiences have created the person I now am, and I've made much more conscious decisions about the type of workplaces I've found myself in as well. I think I've been far more deliberate, and I think it sort of gets to a point in your career. Starts out, you're being interviewed for a job, and then I feel like it flips and you're interviewing as to whether you want that job. And that's certainly a shift that I found in my career after a period of time. So,
yep. Yeah. Wise words. So you're youngish, let's say, looking at professional life. How did you decide to go into the law? What was it that brought you there?
That's a good question, David. I think, to take you back to me as a young guy on a farm in rural New South Wales, Australia, I think I can remember a point at which I decided I didn't want to be a farmer. And I think that's a relevant aspect in my story. I was about 8 years old, and scorching hot summer's day. And I remember being out in the paddock with my father, and this is a pretty awful story, actually. We were in the middle of drought. I mentioned we were sheep farmers. And I watched my father pen up 1,100 sheep, and he walked around and shot them. And he did that because the alternative to shooting his sheep was letting them die of hunger. And the cost of freighting them outweighed what they were worth at the time, which is hard to believe because right now in Australia, lambs sell for, I don't know, $250 each or something. The prices are really high. But at that point, they weren't. And I witnessed him doing that, which was obviously a very devastating moment for him. And in his true sort of stoic style, he got on with the job and wiped the sweat from his forehead and then moved on to the next job. But I could see it affected him. It certainly affected me. And I think at that point in time, I decided I'd do whatever I had to ensure that my kids didn't experience that type of thing and experience, I suppose, a level of economic insecurity that I was well aware of even as a young 8-year-old in the hot summer in Australia. So I think that sort of that doesn't quite answer your question, because that probably is more what I decided I didn't want to be. But I think it planted the seed, David, for me wanting to have a sort of linear career path. And then as I got older, I quite enjoyed school. I really enjoyed English. I enjoyed writing and reading. And I think the way law allowed people to express themselves sort of appealed to me, and the creative aspect of it. And it was an opportunity that presented. So that's why I decided I combined law with arts. So I was able to do English literature and cinema studies and things that I found actually really quite interesting, and did the 2 degrees, telling people all the way through that I was never going to be a lawyer, but that I was just going to do a law degree, and probably do something far more, in my mind, exciting than be a lawyer. I think as so often happens then, you spend this time worrying about whether you'll get a placement at a law firm or not, and you kind of collectively, I think, wear this sort of anxiousness around the competitive nature of getting those law firm positions. And then when I did receive offers for law firms, I was like, well, it makes sense to do that. I can be qualified. And then when I go off and become a diplomat or something, I could always fall back on it. So then I went and worked for a large corporate firm here in Melbourne in the M&A team. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm still very close to my principal, the partner to whom I was articled in my first year. She's a close friend, even 20-something years on. There's a lot I loved about it, but I was sort of seeking a bit more adventure, David, so I can continue down this route, or maybe this is too much information about my career at this point, but I guess I sort of fell into it to an extent.
Yeah. Well, and We'll put a pin in the creative side of things because I see a lot of that now in what you do with your function. I think it's really neat, and we can talk about that a bit more when we get there. But I'm seeing some of where that comes from. So you're doing the corporate law thing.
Yes.
Big
yes.
firm corporate law, and you ended up in Russia.
Well,
right?
You're right. That's right. So that was the next step. I mean, I've always been an adventurous person. I studied part of my degree in Holland at the University of Utrecht. I studied international law on exchange. I had also taken a year off and travelled solo through Europe when I was 21. I deferred university for a year. I was desperate to get back to Europe or somewhere. And this was in the mid-2000s. There were some great opportunities for junior M&A lawyers in the Middle East and Russia, the sort of emerging markets at that point in time. And so I decided to take an opportunity with a global firm in their Moscow office. So after a couple of years of working in the M&A firm in Australia, I packed up and moved to Moscow as a mid-20s something lawyer. No Russian language skills, really no sense of what I was in for at all. But I wanted to be somewhere different. I'd done a lot of traveling in Eastern Europe. I hadn't gotten as far east as across to Russia, and it appealed to me. Great firm, great work. And I did 12 months of that, David, which certainly ticked the adventure box. It was exciting and interesting, but it was also really hard. I mean, this was pre-smartphones, even just finding my way around the expansive Moscow underground was an incredible challenge because I had to learn Cyrillic really quickly so I could understand the stations because none of them were in English characters. So I very quickly did learn Cyrillic and I could read the signs, but then most of the time I didn't know what they meant. So it was a lot of fun. It was
the one with the upside down squiggly is the one you got to get off at.
Yeah, exactly. That's
what
kind
I'm
of what
imagining.
it was like. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
I couldn't even take photos of signs because I don't believe my Nokia had a camera. So it was
I remember
primitive
those,
times.
yes. But you could play Snake.
Yeah,
Play
exactly.
Snake, but you couldn't take a photo.
Yeah,
totally.
exactly. That's the only use of it, that and phone calls. So
Wow.
So that sort of feels like a different time. And I think that scratched my itch, perhaps, for that adventure I had been seeking. At that point, David, I sort of was, as typical of those big global law firms in an M&A role, I was working pretty long hours. And I do remember, again, we spoke about this, you get to middle age, you start reflecting on pivotal moments. I do recall one of the partners that I worked for in that office who had a young son at the time. I believe his son was 2 or 3 years old. And we'd gone into the office on a Friday. And at this point, it was Saturday morning. And we sort of finished our DD report or whatever it was we were working on. And then it occurred to me that he'd brought his bag for the weekend into the office with him on Friday. So it got to about Saturday morning at 8 or 9 a.m. It was nice and sunny. I recall that. We kind of finished our Friday and our all-night Friday night, and he sort of shut down his computer and picked up his bag and headed to the airport because he was flying out to somewhere to meet his wife and son. And I thought, at that point he seemed quite old. I think he was probably 38 or 39 at the time. And I thought, when I get to that age, I don't want to be doing that. It's starting a holiday when you've had no sleep the night before. I knew that he'd be on his BlackBerry, as it was at the time, all weekend. We had so much going on. We had calls over the course of the weekend. And I just thought, this is not, this what really drives me. It's not, there's nothing that job provides that was sufficient to drive me to sacrifice those other aspects, particularly when I was aware there was a young child involved. So look, I realised at that point, or felt that it wasn't for me. Perhaps also that was a different time in the way law firms operated. I mean, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'd like to think.
I think things have changed a little bit for the better now. So
I hope so.
Yeah. But it was a fabulous experience. It was a terrific firm. I mean, I couldn't have asked for better experience and better exposure. I just didn't want that lifestyle for myself down the track. So at that point, I pretty quickly resigned. And I did have a leave of absence for 2 or 3 years from the firm I had worked at in Melbourne. They very kindly left the door open for me. And I also emailed my lovely manager who was in my previous role back here in Melbourne. I mentioned I'm still friends with her, and I said, look, thank you so much for this leave of absence, but I've decided I don't want to work in law firms anymore. So I kind of went, I'm out, I'm done. And at the time I looked online at a website that had roles for, various roles, but including roles for in-house lawyers. And I thought, look, I'm just going to take time to come home from this year or so away from Australia and think about what I want to do. And as I was scrolling through, there was one role that appealed to me, and it was legal counsel at the Australian Grand Prix Corporation back in Melbourne. Well, maybe I could still be a lawyer. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't totally give up on this. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring. I did put in an application for that role and managed to get the role before I got back to Australia through a series of video calls, which were sort of quite new and exciting at that point in time. Mm-hmm. And I started 6 or 7 days after I got back to Australia. Wow. So these plans I had of finding myself and deciding what I wanted to do with myself evaporated quickly, and I got home, just recovered from the jet lag, and put on my suit and started a new role. Yeah. So it wasn't what I planned, but I felt very grateful to have this really terrific role. And I did 3 years at the Grand Prix Corporation, and it was a terrific role for someone in their late 20s. I mean, it was so exciting. I went from big law firm M&A to attending the event. So a couple of months after I started, I was at the Formula One Grand Prix here in Melbourne, and I remember getting T-shirts signed by the team members of the band Kiss, and running around doing all of these sort of non-traditional roles or tasks for a lawyer. But it made me realize how different legal roles can be. It was a very broad commercial role. It was all about drafting. We did sponsorship agreements with our major sponsors. We negotiated our licensing rights with Formula One management. It was really broad, and I'd say it was a terrific role to obtain those broad commercial skills of being a lawyer. And it was exciting and fun. I got to go to Red Bull parties and meet a lot of the Formula One drivers. It was really fun. So
and then in the office in Melbourne, where you're based now, there's a Formula One car, right?
There is. It's kind of, I often think in life there's this sort of 360 experience that I have more and more, and maybe that's a feature of getting older and just having more days under your belt of life. But at the time I worked for the Grand Prix, we're not in that office. When I joined McCain almost 6 years ago, I turned up for my first day and looking at the levels, okay, I've got to get to level 10, level 5, Australian Grand Prix Corporation. And I jumped in the lift, and there was the CEO with whom I had worked, 10 or so years previously. Oh, Westy, how are you? And so it was interesting. They'd shifted to the new offices that I now find myself in. And it's not uncommon that I still see somebody in the list that I worked with from all those years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Well, so I think that there's a lot to say there about like connections and serendipity and that kind of vibe, and also not burning any bridges, if you know what I mean. Right?
Yeah,
because
I think that's
the
right.
in-house community, especially, is quite small, and you're almost certainly going to run into people that you worked with somewhere else. You
are, and I had stayed in contact with my previous 2 bosses from that role as well. On that point, I think you're right. It is a small pool, but I also would say on that point, you don't want to burn bridges. But I would encourage people not to sit back and, as they say, suck it up. If you see things that are wrong and you feel like the wrong thing has been done, I would encourage people to think carefully, but to not just internalize that because of fear of what that might do as far as your future network, etc.
Very well said.
Do what's right and protect yourself and speak up about things, because the older I get, the more I realize that if you've got an issue with a situation, probably other people do as well.
Yep.
And you've got that responsibility. So I just think, I hope that those days of just quietly sitting back and and being anxious or concerned about, you know, not upsetting somebody more senior than you or who has more influence than you are decreasing, because I don't want anyone else to experience that type of situation either. I think it's important.
Very, very well said. I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And obviously there's situations where you don't need to be friends with everybody.
You don't, no. Yeah.
And that's part of the job. I mean, it's one of the challenges of the in-house role that a lot of the other functions don't necessarily have. That we have this ethical obligation and a professional obligation, right, through the Bar Association, et cetera, that basically that's why we're there. And in some cases, you're just going to have to take a position that others aren't super happy with, but that's the job, right?
It can be an uncomfortable position to hold, and it's one that I speak to my team members a lot about. Sort of refer to it as kind of a professional relationship. You know, of course we need to be friendly, and relationships are so important in us effectively doing our roles, but you need to also accept that at a certain point you don't want to be too close, because you may have to pull rank, and you don't want to feel torn between what your obligation is, as you say, your ethical duty as a lawyer and your obligation to the company, versus what you may feel as an alliance with an individual. That's problematic.
Indeed. So you're Formula One. Next step.
Yeah, the next step was I went and worked for a large family-owned manufacturing business here in Melbourne. Maybe about 3,000 employees and revenue at the time of, I think, somewhere between 1 to 1.5 billion Australian dollars. So it was a large family business, privately owned. So it's a nice sort of synergy to my role now at McCain as well. And it was a highly acquisitive business. So they liked my M&A background, and I was eager to get back into that type of commercial role. I enjoyed my time at Formula One, but I was ready to move on. And that was a terrific role. I was there for almost 7 years. We acquired a lot of companies in that time. And I was my role was general commercial, but I'd say at least 50% of my role was pure M&A as well, which was great. I got to sit there with this incredible business owner, successful billionaire who was constantly looking for new opportunities and engaging really smart ways of negotiating and getting great outcomes. And I was lucky to be one of the 10 people who sat in the head office with him. So I became, quite close, and I learned an enormous amount. In fact, I exchanged text messages yesterday with him, and we've been in touch for years since as well. So it was a really great learning ground for me. And we also went through an IPO. We actually listed the company while I was there. That was probably the biggest thing I did in that role, being involved in an IPO from the inside. I'd been an advisor in a law firm capacity for IPOs. I'd never been, obviously, one from the inside. So that was terrific as well to experience that. It was pretty hectic. And so I had that experience of about 3.5 or so years in a family business. And then I was still in the same seat, but then I was in a public listed role for the next 3 or so years, which was also great. I mean, I sort of, become familiar very quickly with the listing rules. I was already familiar with those from the other side of the fence, of course, but it taught me the different way of thinking and practicing when you're in a private versus a public company.
Totally. Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, great role, and got to travel to places like New York and negotiate billion-dollar loans and all sorts of incredible experiences that I was lucky enough to have.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I mean, super varied experiences that you had already at that point. And then you're at car sales for a period of time before McCain?
I was. So then I shifted into another listed company. Car Sales is an online forum for buying and selling cars and other vehicles, etc. It's a sort of well-known listed entity here in Australia, very popular with consumers. I think a lot of mums and dads have shares in that business. It's a great business, very entrepreneurial. I sort of thought I'll try a bit of a tech role. I had a contact there who encouraged me to come across to the role. And look, it was a lot of fun. I think for me, that role made me realize I actually really like working in a business that produces something tangible.
Sure.
And that sort of led me then to the role at McCain. I was tapped about this role, and it was obviously a very different opportunity. It was a general counsel role, but also of a pretty broad region. So it really ticked a lot of boxes for me, and back to making something tangible that was consumer facing, and I quite liked that.
Yes. Well, and I don't know if we've spoken about this before, Steve, but I know car sales very well from my eBay days.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
A big competitor for the Gumtree Australia business, right? Like
Gumtree,
car
yes.
sales. We had a big autos platform, and yeah, car sales is sort of the dare I say, the dominant player in the market. I don't know. From a non-legal perspective, let's say from a non-legal perspective, it's the dominant player.
Outside antitrust. Yep.
Yes. But a very, very well-known business in Australia.
Yeah.
And then on to, where you are today at McCain. So maybe you can give us an understanding of the McCain business and its history at this point.
Yeah, certainly, David. I touched on it before, obviously. I love the story of these brothers who founded this business about 65 years ago in northern Canada, a lovely village called Florenceville, about 1,000 or so kilometres sort of northeast of Toronto, if I've got that right. And they started there in the potato growing industry, and then shifted. I think it was really with the advent of technology around freezing food. And then they sort of tilted and shifted into manufacturing of French fries and largely sort of following the evolution of the McDonald's business and other what we call QSR restaurants, quick service restaurants, is the acronym we use. And as I mentioned, they started supplying McDonald's from the very early days, and then they really grew and expanded with that business globally. And it's this terrific story of these very community-minded people. I think everyone in Canada knows the McCain family or of them. And certainly everyone in Florenceville is connected to the business in some way. If they don't work for them, then the family has, paid for them to fly to Toronto to get medical attention or whatever it might be. There's some incredible stories about what they've done for the community and the broader business community in Canada. And then this business just grew and grew. They were true entrepreneurs. They were real risk takers. They expanded from Canada to the UK next. And then shortly after, they expanded to Australia. So Australia was the second market that they expanded into. And that was around 55 years ago now. So very early in their business. So they're a very famous brand down here, and a brand that I think most Australians would mistakenly think were Aussie. I did before joining, actually. Wow. And look, I think they've done a terrific job of that sort of entrepreneurial family business model continuing, despite the fact it's now a company of approximately 23,000 employees globally, and I think revenue roughly around 14 billion Canadian per annum. So it's a decent sized business, yet it's still family owned, and I would say it still maintains a lot of those features that you would expect to see in a family business. And I've met many of the family members, and they're still quite involved in the operation of the business. And in many ways, it does feel like you're part of a family business, which I think is incredibly difficult to maintain once a business grows this size.
Fascinating.
And I'm lucky in that, although I'm a long way from Toronto, which is the global head office, I'm here down in Melbourne, Australia, I report directly into Toronto. And because of my role as a VP of the region, I still have I'm lucky to have that close connection with the centre of the business. So I feel very connected to it despite my geographical separation.
Well, and it's such a, we both have international backgrounds, but like for me, it's always fascinating to deal with those international issues, the international business issues as well as the legal ones, right? And I can remember you saying something about, was it Poland, where there was a...
Yeah, our global lawyers catch up once a year. The team is sort of 30 or so of us, and we did catch up in Poland, I think, shortly before I saw you in Melbourne. That's right. we had 3 or 4 days together as a group, which is just so valuable.
Was it a manufacturing, like, production facility?
That's right. We do always do our catch ups either at a where a factory exists in McCain or an office, and that's right. We chose that part of Poland because we were able to visit the factory, and that's another thing I'll say. It's really important in McCain for us to do a walkthrough of the factory, to put the hard hats on, talk to the people. And that's something else I really love. It's that connection to where our product is grown and manufactured. And it's something that we make sure that we disseminate right throughout the organization. So yes, that's a good example of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with someone with the background that you have, to be in that sort of environment, is really, I'm sure, like, connecting you back to your roots.
Oh, it does. I feel very lucky. So often I almost pinch myself. What am I doing in this situation? How did I end up so lucky to be, meeting with these farmers in a particular obscure part of the world and talking about the growing technologies that they employ? I should say as well, another aspect of McCain's business that I'm really proud of is its focus on regenerative agriculture and our sustainability report. So McCain works very closely. We've got a huge agronomy team, and they really study the science of growing food and how to optimally do that in a sort of reduced reliance of chemicals, a more optimal way of growing and producing with the environment in mind and the growing population that we have across the world, and how do we feed the people that we have. So that's something I'm really proud of, and I've been fortunate enough to visit some of these, what we call farms of the future, that McCain has. The family invests significant resources into this space, and it's something that I love, speaking to these agronomy guys and the farmers themselves about how to employ these technologies that we've helped develop. So
fantastic. So it sounds like a super interesting business. Could you tell us a bit more about, like, the legal function and particularly the part of it that you're most involved in?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you know, most involved in the Asia Pacific region, as my role as general counsel of this region. When I joined almost 6 years ago, David, there had never been a GC for Asia Pacific based down here, which was surprising given the size of the business. It's pretty huge down here. There was one lawyer in India who dealt a lot with sort of compliance type issues, and there were no other lawyers in the region. So over the last few years, I've grown up. There's a team of, I think, including me, 10 of us in my team now, and they're spread across the region, from India to China to Malaysia to Australia, and then in Australia we also serve the South African business from a legal perspective. Our head office for the region is in Melbourne, although we now have some of our executives based in Kuala Lumpur, where we also have an office. So it's a large number of countries: South Africa, China, India, what we call JKC, which is Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Taiwan, and then Australia, New Zealand, and there's about 9 countries in that JKC region. So it's incredibly culturally diverse. Ways of doing business are extremely different in those countries. It's what I love. A big part of what I love about my role is that diversity, even within my team. We have an annual in-person catch-up. Last year it was in Singapore, and I had an external consultant do a terrific program, and I'm happy to provide you the details after this if you wish, of who we used, on cultural training. So there was a full sort of assessment of each of us individually on these sort of spectrums of direct versus indirect way of working, and being self-led versus directed by others, for example, all of these various metrics. And then that information was pulled together, and we spent a day in person in Singapore with this consultant, who then explained the results, but also put us all on these lines that also tracked the averages of all the various countries, as well as Canada, because we're a Canadian company. I wanted that North American cultural overlay as well. And it was just fascinating, I think, for all of us to see the different way we think and the different way we behave. And what I really wanted my team to take away from that is don't just assume the way that you've read something is the way it was intended. And I think that applies more broadly to all of us in all aspects of our life. It's not just where you're dealing with people from a very vastly different cultural background. But I think it was quite illuminating for a lot of my team to sit back and think, that's how I perceive something that was said, but someone else perceives it in a very different way. And it's sort of almost, I think it's most basic. It's to sort of be kind and give people the benefit of a doubt and create the culture where you can speak about it and clarify things, which is what I try and focus on. So look, that is one of the aspects of my role, which I really love. It creates complexity, but I really enjoy that aspect of it of my role, and I really like leading a team and making sure that they are focused on the emotional intelligence piece of our role, which is just so important within our team, but also servicing and partnering with the broader business as a legal function. And the diversity of geopolitical issues that we face. I mean, I sort of joined, and 6 months later we went into lockdown with COVID, and then there were the resulting supply chain issues, and then there's look at all of the political upheaval that we're seeing in many parts of the world, including where you sit, and the implications for a business like ours, which is a true global supply chain, and we're subject to flow-on implications of unrest in the Middle East, of tariffs potentially being imposed on Canadians, and all of these other issues that there's never a dull moment.
100%. Yeah. No, I imagine the government relations affairs teams of pretty much every company.
I will say, it's an interesting point.
Super China, spun up at the moment.
Well, exactly. We're not unique in that respect. And I think that's an interesting point, because I'm sure you would have seen many organizations where there's a very close connection, or maybe even a direct line between government relations and legal functions. In China, our government relations team, which is obviously a very key government relations team, reports into my team as well. And I've done a lot of work in that area, particularly in ANZ during COVID. And it made me realise that the synergies between what a government relations team does and what a legal team does. So I think that's a very important point. It's only become more important, that connection and that working relationship over the last few years.
Absolutely. And a fascinating area of legal practice to be involved with. The team that you have at McCain also involves, global legal operations, and you're running it from Melbourne. And I mean, there's so many cool things about it. MLIFT. Why don't you tell us?
Okay. Yeah, that's a little acronym that we came up with. One of the things that I talk to my team a lot about is that we need to do the work, but we also need to be seen to be doing the work. We need to make sure our stakeholders are aware of what it is we're doing. And so in that vein, when my role was expanded and I took on the global responsibility for the legal ops component of our function, I wanted to create a sort of catchy, short way of explaining to the business what it is we're trying to achieve. And that's the acronym MLIFT, which stands for McCain Legal Innovation for Tomorrow. And we've got a nice little animation, which you may have noticed at the bottom of my email chain. And the idea was, I'll see my email signature, and then because this is sort of swirling and moving, hopefully it draws people's eyes down to it. And then my hope was that internally they'd be asking, what is this? What is this MLIFT thing? And I think a big part of that was the sort of first step in creating what I hope is a view of our function as being innovative, and technology and new and improved ways of working, embracing as a function. So I think to generalize, legal teams and lawyers are not typically seen as necessarily the most innovative, tech embracing members of a business. And our business, like many others, is very tech embracing. We've got a very forward thinking CEO who I mentioned before. We've got this real focus on sustainability, and I think it's fair to say he's probably the person who leads that. He similarly is very embracing of AI technology and all the great opportunities we have to engage with this amazing technology that we're just seeing develop in improving our business and the way we do things. So look, that's how we kind of came up with this MLift, and then off the back of that, we formed a committee of MLifters, people in the organisation and the legal team who have an interest in this area and represent the various teams within the legal team across the globe. And then over the past year or so, we've done a lot of work of self-reflection. We had an external consultant come and help us undertake a very thorough exercise, a current state diagnostic, it's called. So these individuals came in and interviewed all the team members. They interviewed a number of people in the business as well, our commercial stakeholders, to obtain feedback on how we operate, how we're perceived to operate, what it is we're doing, how we work as a team, what platforms, technology platforms we're utilizing, how we operate as lawyers. And then a transformation report, it's called, was created for us to then digest, which is, this is what you're doing. This is how you perceive yourselves. This is how the business perceives you. This is how you tend to work. These are the platforms you're using. This is where you want to be. And, these are our suggestions for how you get there. And then since then, a lot of my time, which is split, as I say, between my role as a general counsel, but also my role as global head of legal ops, the legal ops component, I've spent a lot of time thinking and speaking to people in the business and peers elsewhere. That's an important piece as well, around how do we fix the gaps that we knew we had, that we've now identified and confirmed through this exercise of self-reflection that we've undertaken, and how are we going to plug those gaps. So we've done a lot of work on meeting with multiple providers of technology, document management systems, contract management systems, you name it. We've looked at AI legal drafting tools. We've done multiple demos of all of these different options. And I will say it's overwhelming how much is out there. And it's for that reason that I engaged an external consultant who is technology agnostic, who doesn't receive any kickbacks or anything like that from the tech providers, to help guide us to say, well, we've got hundreds of different options here. What are the ones that are right for your business? Because we know you well after the experience we've had with you and the exercise we've undertaken. And now we're at the point, David, of comparing all of these different options, thinking about which ones are right for us. And that'll be the next step for us, is going to the business and saying, this is what we feel we need to get to where we want to be. And also where we want to be is supporting the business's growth aspirations in our 2030 strategy. So we took what the business wants from us as a business, not just a legal function, and then we reversed it and said, well, this is how we are going to be able to get there. We want to free up time of the lawyers that we have to deal with the higher value, low volume matters, and less time on the high volume, low value matters. And focus our lawyers more on providing strategic advice and support to the business to pursue those growth aspirations.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, unfortunately, I think I've taken as much of your time as I can possibly take politely today. And I think we're definitely going to be speaking more, and maybe we'll get you back on the podcast, because this has been such a great conversation. I really, really appreciate your time. And so, we'll give you the rest of your day back in Melbourne. And this has been, for everybody out there, this has been the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by LawVu. And thank you for joining us again today, and see you again soon.
Thanks, David.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawvu.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.